Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We know you guys are busy people. You want the important stuff, the fascinating stuff, without having to wade through mountains of information.
That's right. We take those mountains of information, we sift through it all, and then we bring you those golden nuggets, the stuff that really makes you think differently about history.
Today we're going to be diving into a pretty incredible moment. It's June 1776, and we're talking about the Battle of Sullivan's Island.
Yeah, the Battle of Sullivan's Island. This was one of the first major clashes in the South between the British and the Americans. A real test of strength.
A test of strength. And we've got a ton of sources here, everything from military reports to personal diaries to try to piece together what actually happened and what it meant for the rest of the war.
Absolutely. And I think what makes this deep dive so fascinating is that we get to see how both sides viewed this battle, what their plans were, how those plans fell apart. The mistakes, the ingenuity, the sheer determination on both sides. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the battle itself, let's take a step back. What was the big picture for the British in 1776? What were they trying to achieve in the South?
Well, in 1776, the British, they had this grand plan. They wanted to establish a strong presence in the southern colonies,
Yeah.
really consolidate their power.
Makes sense, right? Control the South, cut off supplies, and maybe even outflank the Continental Army up north?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And a key part of this strategy, this might surprise some people, they were really banking on loyalist support, especially from the Scottish Highlanders in North Carolina.
Yeah, the Highlanders had a reputation as fierce warriors.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And the British believed that these loyalists would flock to their banners. It would give them a real edge.
Real leg up in the South. So they were planning on combining naval operations with these loyalist forces, create a kind of 1-2 punch against the Americans.
That was the theory. But as we'll see, theory and reality rarely line up perfectly, especially in war.
Especially in war. And our sources paint a picture of some pretty significant hiccups. Right from the get-go. What were some of those early challenges the British faced?
Well, first off, you gotta remember, this was the 18th century. Travel by sea was at the mercy of the elements, and the weather was not cooperating. Storms delayed the fleet's progress across the Atlantic.
So those grand plans for a coordinated assault are already starting to slip.
Right, and then on top of the weather issues, you had serious logistical problems. Troops under Cornwallis. They were supposed to be sailing from Ireland.
Crucial reinforcements for that southern campaign.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. But they were way behind schedule. I mean, significantly late in arriving in North Carolina. And that meant that the entire timetable for the southern operation was thrown into disarray.
And all of this even before they set their sights on Charleston.
Yeah, this is all before they even get to Charleston.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the frustration. I mean, you've got this carefully crafted plan, and it's starting to unravel before you even engage the enemy.
And then General Clinton, who was supposed to be leading this southern campaign, he shows up in North Carolina expecting to meet this large force of loyal Scottish Highlanders ready to join the fight.
Right. He's thinking, okay, I'm finally here. Let's rally the troops and get this campaign rolling. But when he arrives, he gets some shocking news.
Oh, yeah. This is the part where things really go sideways for the British. What did Clinton find when he landed?
Disaster. He found out that those loyal Highlanders, those reinforcements he was counting on, they had been crushed just weeks before.
They had been absolutely routed, wiped out at the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. A small battle, but huge consequences.
Absolutely. A major setback for the British. Their southern strategy was falling apart before their very eyes.
So what do? I mean, their initial plan is in ruins.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot. They need a new target, and they need it fast. So they start looking around, and Charleston comes into focus.
Charleston, the wealthiest city in the South, a major port, a symbol of colonial power.
Exactly. It was a tempting target. And Admiral Parker, who commanded the British fleet, he'd been sending out scouting vessels. And these reports were suggesting that Charleston's defenses were incomplete, vulnerable.
A ripe plum just waiting to be plucked. At least that's what it looked like from the British perspective.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how intelligence in war can be both a blessing and a curse.
Right.
Sometimes that information that seems solid can turn out to be faulty. And in this case, the reports about Charleston's weakness were way off the mark.
So the British, they set their sights on Charleston, hoping for a quick victory, an easy win to salvage their southern campaign. But meanwhile, on the American side, who was in charge of defending the city?
Well, the key figure here is Colonel William Moultrie, a local militia leader. And he's given the task of organizing the defense of Charleston.
A huge responsibility, right? I mean, this is the front line of the revolution in the South.
Absolutely. And Moultrie, he knew that the British were coming,
Mhm.
and he was determined to make them pay dearly for every inch of ground.
And the heart of Moultrie's defense strategy was a fort under construction on Sullivan's Island.
That's right. Sullivan's Island, this little island. It's strategically located right at the entrance to Charleston Harbor.
So any ships that wanted to attack Charleston, they would have to navigate right past Sullivan's Island.
Exactly. So Moultrie, he understood the importance of this location, and he starts building this fort.
Now, from what I read, this fort was a little unusual, right?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-oh.
It was far from your typical European-style fortress. You know, those big, imposing stone structures?
Yeah, those are pretty intimidating.
Instead, this fort on Sullivan's Island, well, as one American officer put it was basically an immense pen filled with sand.
An immense pen filled with sand. What does that even mean?
So picture this. The walls are about 20 feet high, 16 feet thick, and they're made from these palmetto logs.
Palmetto logs, those palm trees that grow all over the South.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Not exactly known for their strength or durability, right?
I wouldn't want to build a house out of them, let alone a fort.
Right. But here's the thing. The Americans, they filled the spaces between these logs with sand. Tons and tons of sand.
So it's like a giant sandcastle.
Kind of. And it was a slow and laborious process. I mean, they were essentially building this fort by hand.
And all of this is happening under the looming threat of a British invasion.
Exactly. A race against time. But there's another layer to this story. Because around this time, a new player enters the scene. General Charles Lee.
Ah, General Liu.
Yeah.
A controversial figure. A British-born officer who had fought for the Americans in the North.
Yeah, he had a pretty impressive military resume. And he was sent south to help coordinate the defense of Charleston. But his arrival created some issues.
Uh-oh. I can sense some drama brewing. What kind of issues?
Well, first off, you got a bit of a chain of command problem. The South Carolina troops weren't formally part of the Continental Army yet, so technically they weren't under Lee's direct command.
So he shows up, this experienced general ready to take charge, and he can't even give orders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it took a direct intervention from John Rutledge, the president of South Carolina, to smooth things over, give Lee authority over all the forces defending Charleston.
So you've got this clash of personalities, a little bit of political maneuvering, and all of this is happening with the British fleet literally on the horizon.
It's a tense situation, to say the least. And it gets even more complicated because when Lee sees Fort Sullivan, this palmetto and sand construction,
Yeah.
let's just say he's not impressed.
He's probably thinking, this is what I'm supposed to defend Charleston with.
Yeah, he basically calls the fort a slaughter pen. He's convinced that it's completely indefensible against a determined British naval attack.
Oh, wow. He's basically saying this fort is a death trap. Abandon it.
Exactly. He strongly recommends evacuating the fort completely.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty stark contrast, right? You've got Moultrie, who believes in his fort,
Mhm.
and you've got Lee, this experienced general who thinks it's a lost cause.
A real clash of opinions. And I bet the soldiers manning those guns, they're probably thinking, what are we supposed to do?
Right. They're caught in the middle of this leadership struggle. But here's where things get really interesting. President Rutledge, he sides with Moultrie. He gives Moultrie a direct order. Obey General Lee in all matters, except for abandoning the fort.
So he's saying, you're in charge, Moultrie. Hold that fort. That's a powerful vote of confidence.
Yeah, it really is. And it shows that Rutledge, maybe he understood something that Lee didn't. Maybe he recognized the strategic importance of Sullivan's Island.
The need to make a stand there. But even though Lee disagreed with the decision to defend the fort, he still had to come up with some kind of plan, right?
Yeah, he does formulate a plan, but it's more of a retreat strategy, a way to pull back if the fort falls. But the speed of the British attack, it essentially throws that plan out the window.
So the British, they don't waste any time. They arrive in force, ready to take Charleston. Describe that fleet for us. What did it look like?
It was an imposing sight. I mean, picture this. 9 warships under the command of Admiral Parker. The flagship was the Bristol, packing over 50 guns.
Wow, that's some serious firepower.
Yeah, and then you had another powerful ship, the Experiment, and several frigates, ships like the Active, the Solbay, even a bomb vessel, the Thunder. They were all anchored just off the coast of Charleston, a clear message to the Americans.
They're here to stay and surrender or face the consequences.
And from what we can gather from our sources, Admiral Parker, he seemed pretty confident, even overconfident.
I can imagine he's commanding this impressive fleet. He's probably thinking, this is going to be a cakewalk.
He even writes to General Clinton saying, hey, I think I can handle this with just the Navy. You and the Army, you can just sit tight for now.
A bold statement.
That's it.
And it turns out a miscalculation of epic proportions. What did the British land forces do? Clinton had thousands of troops, right?
Right, he's got about 2,200 troops. And they land on Long Island, now known as Isle of Palms, which is separated from Sullivan's Island by this narrow channel, Breach Inlet.
So they're just a stone's throw away from the fort.
Pretty much. And the plan is for these troops to wade across Breach Inlet while the Navy bombards the fort from the sea. A classic pincer move.
A coordinated assault sounds pretty formidable. What could go wrong?
Well, it turns out that Breach Inlet is a lot deeper than the British anticipated. The troops, they start wading in, and they quickly realize they're in over their heads.
Yeah.
Literally.
So much for that easy crossing.
Yeah, it's a complete disaster. The water is chest high, shoulder high in some places, and they can't advance. They're stuck.
And all the while, they're sitting ducks. I mean, can you imagine trying to wade through water that deep with cannons firing at you?
No, it's a nightmare scenario. So the land assault is basically called off before it even begins.
So the British Army is stuck on Long Island. The Navy is itching for a fight. And all they can do is exchange some long-range cannon fire.
Yeah, it's a lot of noise fury signifying nothing. And Clinton, he's pretty frustrated by this whole situation. He even makes a snide remark about Parker saying something like, well, I guess the Admiral will have the glory of being defeated alone.
Ouch. Not exactly a ringing endorsement of his naval counterpart.
No, not at all. It reveals some of the tension and the lack of coordination between the Army and the Navy.
And meanwhile, inside Fort Sullivan, Colonel Moultrie and his men are bracing for impact.
They know that a naval bombardment is coming, and they're heavily outgunned.
Outnumbered, outgunned. A classic underdog story. So walk us through that day, June 28th, 1776, the day the British unleashed their fury on Fort Sullivan.
The morning of June 28th, around 9:00 a.m., the British fleet, they move into position. They're about 400 yards off the coast of Sullivan's Island.
Close enough to do some serious damage.
Oh, yeah. And they open fire. A thunderous barrage from those massive guns. The Bristol, the Experiment, several other ships, they're all hammering the fort.
So what's happening inside the fort? How are Moultrie and his men responding to this onslaught?
Well, they're facing some serious challenges. Not only are they outnumbered in terms of artillery, but they're also running low on gunpowder, a critical shortage.
You can't fight a battle without gunpowder.
Exactly. So Moultrie, he knows he can't afford to waste a single shot. He orders his men to fire slowly, deliberately, conserving their ammunition. Only the most skilled gunners are allowed to aim the cannons.
And even with those limitations, the American gunners, they prove themselves to be incredibly accurate.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Even British observers, they commented on the effectiveness of the American fire. They were surprised by the skill and the discipline of these colonial gunners.
It's like David versus Goliath, this small ragtag force holding their own against the might of the British Navy.
And a key part of their success, it might surprise you, was the very nature of their fort. Those palmetto logs and that sand.
The immense pen filled with sand that General Lee had scoffed at.
Exactly. Remember the British? They're used to fighting against traditional forts. Brick and stone.
Yeah, those forts, when you hit them with a cannonball, they crumble, they shatter.
Right. But this palmetto fort, it reacts differently. When a cannonball hits those logs, the impact is absorbed. The logs, they kind of shake and shudder, but they don't break apart.
So the fort is taking a beating, but it's holding up better than anyone expected.
And then there's another unexpected advantage. The British had this bomb vessel, the Thunder, and they figured, okay, mortar fire is going to be devastating against this low-lying fort.
Raining down explosives from above. Yeah, that sounds pretty terrifying.
But again, the sand comes into play, the mortar shells. They land in the soft sand, and they just kind of bury themselves. Or they get absorbed by this marshy area in the center of the fort.
A natural defense mechanism.
Yeah, it's like the fort itself is fighting back. And on top of that, the British, they made a crucial mistake. They anchored the Thunder too far away. And then they tried to compensate by overloading the mortars with gunpowder, which actually caused some of them to break.
So the mortar fire is largely ineffective. The cannons are having a tough time breaching those walls. And the British land forces, they're still stuck on Long Island.
Yeah, they did try to launch a smaller attack on the northern end of Sullivan's Island using longboats. But the Americans, they were ready for them.
They had anticipated that move.
Yeah, Colonel William Thompson. He had set up a strong defensive line on that side of the island. And they unleash a withering fire on those British boats. Grape-shot musket fire. It's too much.
And so the British land forces, they're forced to retreat once again.
Yep, back to square one, stuck on Long Island, watching the naval battle unfold.
Unable to provide any support. So the British, they're taking a beating. Their plans are falling apart. What's going through Admiral Parker's mind at this point?
Well, he's got to be feeling pretty frustrated. His grand plan for a quick and decisive victory, it's turned into a slugfest. And then he tries another tactic. He sends 3 frigates, the Sphinx, the Siren, and the Action. He sends them to try and outflank the fort.
To get around behind those guns.
Exactly, a classic naval maneuver. But there's a problem. These frigates, they run aground on a sandbar.
Another navigational blunder.
Yeah, and it's a major turning point in the battle. Moultrie himself, he writes about this later. He says if those frigates had reached their intended position, they could have raked the fort with devastating fire.
Game over for the Americans.
Potentially. But luck was on their side that day. The Sphinx and Siren, they eventually managed to free themselves. But the Action remained stuck. A sitting duck.
So the British, they're taking heavy losses. Their ships are being battered. What are some of the most dramatic moments of the battle?
Oh, there are a few. Yeah. The Bristol Admiral Parker's flagship, it takes a real pounding, over 70 hits.
Wow, I bet the crew is feeling pretty demoralized at this point.
And the Experiment, it's also taking a lot of damage. The Americans, they're using this special type of ammunition called chain shot.
Chain shot? What's that?
So imagine 2 cannonballs connected by a chain. And when they fire this chain shot, it whips through the air, and it can rip through sails. It can tear down masts. It's incredibly effective.
A brutal weapon. And I understand there's a pretty famous incident involving Admiral Parker himself.
Yeah, during the height of the battle, a cannonball, it smashes into the Bristol's quarterdeck. And it slightly wounds Admiral Parker.
Oh, no. A direct hit on the Admiral.
Yeah, and according to some accounts, this cannonball, it actually tears away part of Parker's trousers.
I bet that was a story he didn't tell at dinner parties.
Probably not. It's one of those little details that you find in the historical records that really humanizes these larger-than-life figures.
It shows that even admirals aren't invincible. Now, during the battle, there's this moment where the American fire suddenly stops. What happened there?
Well, remember, they've been dealing with this gunpowder shortage all day. And at some point, they just run out, dangerously low.
A critical moment. Everything could fall apart.
And Moultrie, he's got to be thinking, this is it. We're done for.
What happens next?
Well, generally, he steps up. He organizes a resupply of ammunition from the mainland. It arrives just in the nick of time.
A close call. And I bet the soldiers inside the fort, they're cheering when they see those fresh supplies arriving.
I'm sure they were.
Oh.
And he actually visits the fort at one point during the battle.
I wonder what he was thinking, seeing that fort still standing.
It's hard to know for sure, but he does say something to Moultrie along the lines of, well, I see you're doing pretty well here. Looks like you don't need me.
A bit of a backhanded compliment. Maybe there's a little bit of professional jealousy there.
Perhaps, but you got to give credit where credit is due. Moultrie's fort is holding up against everything the British can throw at it, and Admiral Parker, he's starting to realize that this battle isn't going as planned.
He thought he could just pulverize the fort into submission.
Yeah, he figured those Palmetto logs, they wouldn't stand a chance against his cannons. But like you said before, that spongy wood, it absorbs the impact and the sand. It helps to cushion the blows.
An unconventional defense, but a brilliant one.
And then there's this incredible moment of heroism, the Moultrie flag. The blue flag with the white crescent moon, it's flying over the fort, and it gets shot down during the bombardment.
Oh no, I bet that was a blow to morale.
It could have been, but a sergeant named William Jasper, he sees the flag fall, and he immediately jumps up onto the ramparts under heavy fire.
That's incredibly brave.
He retrieves the flag. He raises it again, holding it up until they can rig a new flagpole.
What a story! An act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds.
And this act, it galvanizes the American troops. It gives them a renewed sense of purpose. Moultrie himself, he credits Jasper with inspiring his men to keep fighting.
An ordinary soldier becomes a hero. And it's moments like these that often turn the tide of battle. So after hours of intense bombardment, what happens? Do the British finally break through?
No, they don't. By nightfall, around 9:00 p.m., the British fleet, it withdraws. They've failed to silence the fort's guns.
A stunning victory for the Americans. What are the casualties?
Well, the British, they suffered heavy losses, 91 killed, 170 wounded. And their ships, especially the Bristol and Experiment, they're badly damaged.
A testament to the accuracy of the American gunners.
And the Action, that frigate that ran aground. The British, they're forced to set her on fire to prevent it from falling into enemy hands.
So the Americans, they not only repelled the attack, but they also captured a British warship.
Yeah, it's a significant victory. And on the American side, the losses are remarkably low. 12 killed, 25 wounded.
That's incredible. A testament to the strength of that Palmetto fort. So what happens next? Do the British regroup? Do they try again?
No, they don't. In fact, a few days later, news arrives in Charleston that the Declaration of Independence has been signed.
So you can imagine the celebrations in Charleston.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
A double victory. And the British, they realize that their southern strategy is in shambles. They pack up their troops, they set sail for New York, leaving Charleston in American hands.
An embarrassing defeat for the British, and one that has lasting consequences.
Right. I mean, think about it. This victory at Sullivan's Island, it gives a huge morale boost to the Americans, especially in the South.
It shows them that they can stand up to the British, that they can win.
And it buys them valuable time. It delays the British return to Charleston for almost 4 years.
And during that time, the Americans, they can solidify their defenses, they can build up their forces.
And the fort itself, Fort Sullivan, it's renamed Fort Moultrie in honor of its heroic commander.
A fitting tribute. And even today, South Carolina celebrates Carolina Day to commemorate this crucial victory.
And the Moultrie flag, it becomes a symbol of resistance, a reminder of that day when a small band of Americans defied the odds.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Battle of Sullivan's Island, what are the key takeaways? What should we remember about this often overlooked battle?
Well, I think the first thing is the sheer ingenuity of the American defense. They used what they had, those palmetto logs, that sand, and they created a fort that was surprisingly resilient.
They adapted to their environment, they used their resources wisely.
And then there's the string of British blunders, the faulty intelligence, the logistical problems, the overconfidence. It all adds up to a pretty disastrous campaign.
And ultimately, the Battle of Sullivan's Island. It's a testament to the power of determination, the willingness to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds seem stacked against you.
It's a reminder that sometimes the underdogs can win.
And it makes you think, what if the British had taken Charleston in 1776? How might that have changed the course of the war? It's a question worth pondering.
Definitely. It shows how a single battle, a seemingly small event, can have ripple effects that shape the destiny of nations.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Battle of Sullivan's Island. We hope you learned something new, that you gained a deeper appreciation for this pivotal moment in American history.
And we hope it inspires you to keep digging, to keep exploring those untold stories that make history so fascinating.
See you next time on the deep dive.
Bye, everyone.